Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second half of today's presentation on the Seattle and North Coast and railroading on the North Olympic Peninsula. I'm your host and moderator, Jonathan Fisher, and I have the special pleasure today to have two of my friends, two of my favorite people, frankly, Dana Davis and Frank Zellerhoff from the Seattle and North Coast Railroad here to talk about what railroading was like back in the 1980s on the Olympic Peninsula. So first, I want to just give some biographical information. So Frank, tell us about your career first with the Milwaukee and then with the Seattle and North Coast. What did you do for the railroad?
Well, I was the general superintendent of the Seattle North Coast, um, primarily to build the barge contest on paper and figure out where cars could go on the barges safely. To have a limbered barge, be a level, in other words, a level barge, and negotiate with the Hauff launch and tug to tow the barges and then hire the employees and try to make sure that we could make ends meet, which wasn't easy.
And Dana, you were the favorite employee of the railroad that was never an employee of the railroad, right? How did that work?
I was just an interloper. I got to know I went to school with a couple guys that worked for the railroad, and one day I was watching them pick up a carload of poles in Sequim, and was talking to the conductor, and he said, "You want to go for a ride?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Well, tell your wife to meet us down at Maynard." He said, "We go to Beans down there." I said, "Okay." And that's how it started. And then that was the Milwaukee days. And then I got to know Frank from Seattle North Coast. And a lot of times he couldn't get back to Vashon, so he'd jungle up at my place. And it was a team effort. It was a team effort.
We've got a little bit of a map here that kind of shows a little bit of the railroad. Frank, what do you want to point out to us here? Anything?
Well, this is the Port Townsend, of course. We brought the barges in from Pier 27, and I have to tell you, I worked for the Milwaukee also before the Seattle North Coast. I was a train master for the Milwaukee. But prior to that, I was the chief substation operator, ran electric trains. But so when we first took over Seattle North Coast, it was very, very difficult. We didn't have a very good trackage. The trackage was just terrible. And you may have seen earlier in Steve's presentation, you may have seen a couple of what we called high cube cars, where these box cars were. There was a box car that had like maybe a 3-foot area at the top of this painted white, and was almost 3 feet higher than the other cars. So those cars were capable of carrying 100 tons. So you were trying to run 100-ton cars over track that could only handle really 40-ton cars. Very, very difficult. So, but we eventually got things going pretty good. We got the gravel from Dana Davis here and build up some of the tracks. The UP was very enthusiastic about the operation because they got a lot of the mainline haul. And in fact, I made a deal with the UP, and I went to Idaho and procured about 15 miles of track. It's 110-pound steel, and we put it in this area over here, Carlsberg area, I think it was. So we could pick up speed from 20 miles per hour, from 10 miles an hour to maybe up to 40. So we eventually got it so we could make a round trip in our 12 hours of service, where originally we could only make it a trip to here and then have a switcher here to unload and load the barges, and then highball back to Port Angeles. When we had a 16-hour day, we could do it, but a 12-hour day was really difficult. But we got it down eventually. There was still a lot to do, but we just couldn't get the traffic. In other words, instead of work on the Milwaukee, we'd sometimes make a bar trip every other day. And the Seattle North Coast, we struggled to get a 1 or 2 trips a week.
Okay. Out of the Dave Sproul collection, we have a copy here, folks, of the actual letter, the press release explaining the purchase of the Seattle and North Coast from the bankruptcy trustee in 1979. So the company was incorporated in 1979 and ran from March of 1980 until June of 1984. And so this adventure starts out in beautiful downtown Seattle, Washington. Here's Pier 27. So, in the barge slip in the office, this was the office you worked out of, Frank?
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is my office here. That was my office there. And this was crew's quarters here. This used to be like a little tavern on the waterfront. There was some nice old oak ice boxes in here at one time. That's we heated the place with wood, and we did our thing there. You can see the gallows span way in the back there.
Dana, how did they end up with a sign in Seattle from you?
Well, I was inside. Like I said, I was an interloper, and I wanted to see him make it, but I had a friend that was a sign maker. And so I had him make a sign for Frank to put in his office there.
So I got to tell you about Dana Davis. So one of the things that we were in trouble with was a lot of the Seattle North Coast was right along the waterfront, like in Fort Townsend. And the waves coming in there would wash the rocks away, so we had to rebuild the walls all the time. So the state of Washington was rebuilding the freeway going through the Seattle waterfront, and they had tore down an overpass. They had all this concrete rubble, and I wanted to use that rubble to rebuild the waterfront. So how the heck I was going to handle that rubble and get it up to the peninsula was very difficult. So Dana here had an old front end loader, and he let me have that front end loader, and then I picked up all of the concrete rubble from the overpass on Marginal Way and Spokane Street in Seattle, put it in side dump cars with that front end loader, and took it up there and built up the waterfront. And all actually over at ITT Rainier also. So that's where it.
Well, the postscript of this, I needed a bunch of railroad ties, so I traded this loader for a bunch of railroad ties. Two railroad ties, so.
It was definitely a heroic operation. So one of the things that's really neat about the presentation we're going to be looking at right now is that we had the opportunity to be able to access a number of photographs by Mr. John Illman. Mr. Illman was a very famous railroad photographer and retired from a career with Shell Oil in the Bay Area. He retired to Marrowstone Island, which is near Port Townsend. And one of the things that I think is just fascinating about this whole project is you would think, I mean, it's what, Steve, 40, 50 miles between Port Angeles and Port Townsend? You would think this is New York to Los Angeles, listening to the folks out there, because it's like one end of the universe to the other end of the universe. But anyway, we'll see a number of photos by John Illman in today's presentation. Frank, here's one of your favorite places, the barge slip at Pier 27.
Yeah, Pier 27. Well, these cars are empty. This is the barge 20. That's barge 21. And here you can see 5 cars in here in this string because you got these 2 short tank cars. Otherwise, it's basically 4 50-foot cars. And that's the Foss 118 over here. And that one up there must be like the Foss 250. This is a little coal shed here where the guys, we used to have bargemen that went on the barge and they lived up here on the trip, that little shack back there, and they heated them with the coal from that. This is called a gallows span here. This is the raising and lowering system for the apron, and you had big counterweights in here. You had to be really careful to have a slack in the counterweights for the activity of the raising and lowering of the barge. As you were taking loaded cars off the barge, then the barge would come up and the apron would come up. And if you're putting loaded cars on the barge, then the apron would go down. You had to make sure you had slack so you didn't break the cables. That was pretty good deal, really.
It's kind of interesting. We'll get into this barge loading here as we get further along in our presentation. Frank, while we're on this picture, explain to me why the tank cars are in the center track.
Well, they're on the center track because of the tonnage. You can see these are empties. Those tank cars are loads. So this is being made up to go to Port Townsend. And you needed that tonnage in the center of the barge to keep from having a lift
to keep it level. And what kind of stuff would they ship in those tank cars?
And even 4.5 to some extent. There could be maybe a carload of furniture, or there could be what else we haul up there? Just a couple of bulk things that we would get to go up there. Otherwise, they're all empties.
Except for the tank cars.
Earlier, there was Steve mentioned something about rail cars from Renton, from the Pat car. Those were R-box cars. They were called R-box, and they were actually given a priority to go on the barges to go up on the peninsula so that they could get moved around the country, around the United States.
Well, and the other thing that Pat car liked to do is they liked the initial trip on those cars to be a load, and so that they would be a load on their first run, and they liked that. So, yeah, revenue. Hey, that's why we're here, right? So one of the people that's not here, unfortunately, today is Alan Miller. He lives in Darrington, but Alan is joining us, at least in Penn. Alan was a great cartoonist back in the day, and drew this cartoon for us, and it was in Frank's collection, and Alan frankly didn't remember drawing this. So, Frank, what was the story about this cartoon? Do you remember?
Well, it didn't look quite like this. It was only half the car was in the drink.
Okay.
But the barge was empty, but it was not connected to the apron. It was tied up to the fence there, and getting ready to load. So I think my guess is that the tide was a little too low yet to be loading the cars on there. So I was in the office, and while I was sitting in the office, I saw the train crew coming down the approach to go to the apron. Yeah, what the hell are you guys doing? So I go running out there. Well, they thought the barge was under the slip, and they shoved the car out onto the apron and the cable rope. And half the car, one set of trucks of this car went in the water, and the other set was still up there.
And you guys ended up rescuing the car, didn't you?
The kicker was that what kind of burned me a little bit was I think it was Matson. No, Madison. One of the general construction had a large crane on a freighter, taking loads off a freighter on over at Terminal 15, and so this incident took place, and I got a hold of the foreman there, and they were all through with that ship thing. So I said, hey, bring that barge over here, pick this darn car up, and I get this fixed. Well, one day I had it pick that car up, back up on the track, fix the cables, and then about a couple of weeks later, I got called on the carpet by Milwaukee and Chicago. Want to know who gave me the authority to hire this crane to come and do this. We have a steam crane in Tacoma that we could have brought down there to do this. Well, of course, that would have taken like a week, and they wouldn't have had a snowball's chance in hell of getting it done right. So somebody straightened the guy out in Chicago, because I got a little pat on the butt afterwards, because we were back in operation the next day.
Back in operation the next day. So here's an overview of the Seattle waterfront, Frank. You want to just give us a background on what tracks were yours and what you worked on with Johnny and some of the other stuff here? We got Pier 27. We can see where your slip was.
We switched track 1 and track 2, and in track 4 we kept those newer the red cars. I'll use the color. They were cars Seattle North Coast cars that were leased from ITEL, or the other. What was the railroad, Steve, called?
McLeod.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but we did put a pretty good lucrative thing together with those cars with ITT Rainier. ITT Rainier was having trouble keeping their production up. They to keep their crews working, they produced more than what was being sold at the moment, but they were producing things that would be sold, say, 2 or 3 weeks or months later. So we allowed them to load those cars and use them in warehouses. And so we kept those cars on number 4 tracks, sometimes as many as 80 car loads of product. And then they would notify us every day as to what car numbers that could be released to either the BN or the UP for transcontinental shipment. It was a great thing for them. How it worked out financially for the railroad, I don't really know, because sometimes they would pick, the car numbers would be in like car number 20 or car number 27, and we had to pull a whole damn string out, and we had a terrible time with liveaboards trying to get into some of these cars. But so we build up our train like on the main here. The cars that we're going to put on the barge, we lay them up here on the main, and then we pull the loaded cars up and we shove them on track 1, and then we grab the barge held about 12 to 15 cars, so we'd grab that cut, pull up here, and then we'd have to cross the highway, the waterfront. That was very dangerous, because the cars did not want to stop. We didn't have a train signal. We had to go out there and flag the street with fusees and stop the cars. And we only had one incident in the 4 years that I was down there where we got into headlight meet with the car. But all in all, it worked pretty good.
So this is Harbor Island is on this map too, and Milwaukee Road switched up on Harbor Island, and so we're on what we call the East Waterway was the East Waterway of Harbor Island.
We're on the East Waterway of the Duwamish River.
The East Waterway of the Duwamish River, right? You need to get that.
Because there are 2 slips on Harbor Island.
Okay.
2 car ferry slips and 1 over at Pier 2. But that had nothing to do with Milwaukee.
It had nothing to do with Milwaukee. So here's just a picture of the East Waterway back in Seafair in 1986. And I kind of snuck out on a dock I wasn't supposed to be on it. Took a picture of battleship. So
They would have been north. This was north of Pier 27.
north of Pier 27, looking towards downtown. And for those World War II or military historians, you will note that this is the USS New Jersey, which is in dry dock right now being restored. So, kind of interesting photograph. So, Frank, these are your boxcars.
Yeah, that top one is the brown ones I was talking about earlier. Those are the ITEL cars that came in later after we already had these cars. And those were used, like I say, for ITEL. We use them for anybody else that we could get a load with up on the peninsula. In fact, one time we parked one of these cars in Sequim, and we allowed the Boy Scouts to load that car with newsprint, used newspaper for recycling, and we hauled the thing for free. And then the BN was going to charge to take it to Wenatchee, and I met with the BN, and they hauled the whole thing to Wenatchee for free.
Wow, that's cool. That's a great story. Here's one of your high cube boxcars, Frank. It looks like this thing landed on its head.
This I don't understand this this particular photo, but yeah, there's your high cube cars. You see how much higher it sits over that locomotive there. These cars were in a derailment up at Tukey's.
What happened there?
I just don't know what this is. This might have been after I was gone.
Okay.
I would say it was after I was gone. That was our locomotive there. That was a switcher that we had when I was a train master in Seattle, in the Milwaukee Railroad at behind Sears Roebuck.
So Dana, how did we get these things painted into Seattle and North Coast colors? Do you remember what happened there?
No, I don't. I know what happened. Well, one day, sitting in Sequim were the two coaches,
Yeah.
and I knew Dale
Stanley. Yeah.
Stanley,
Yeah.
but he got Billy Stipe and Dean Frauder, and they painted the cars. Now, I don't know if they painted the locomotives or not, but it didn't take long, and things were green and yellow.
They didn't paint. This one was painted in Seattle.
Oh, okay. All right.
They painted the F7s. The car dealer, car repair place painted the F7s with Dale.
Oh, okay. All right. Up in Port Angeles then. Yeah. So, because didn't you have a rule, Frank, that said that if you were on the train crew, you needed to get 40 hours a week, and if you didn't have a train to run, you were out doing something else, right? How did that work?
Well, that was, the railroad union was pretty strict, and the old timers were very, very strict. But on the Seattle North Coast Railroad, we give you 40 hours pay, 40 hours a week, and we paid you every day. If the train didn't go and you were the hoghead, well, then you might be on the ground helping out with shoveling gravel, or you might be working on the maintenance of the locomotive. I really liked the engineer to work on maintenance of the locomotive so we knew what the hell was going on, than just sit up there and tell us what to do. So
Would take a little better care of it that way, too, if they have to go fix it themselves.
So originally, I did some of this even on Milwaukee, but in the Milwaukee's case was I'd have people that would come to work and I didn't feel they were capable of doing the job, so I would take them up to Harborview Hospital and do a P-test. And if they didn't pass, they were sent home. And then the train crew would be sitting, the rest of the train crew would be sitting in the shack or the yard office, and then I'd come back and I would get a switch list, and I'd go in there and tell the train crew, I said, I'm your field man today, or I'm your head man, whoever it was that couldn't make it. And they were pretty didn't want to go along with that at first, but once they realized that if they didn't, and Citizen Roebuck didn't get their products, or ITT Radiator didn't get their cars, that they would be out of a job, and that would be the end of it. So I became pretty good friends with almost everybody, and they respected my decisions with the way we did things.
So we could see, Frank, behind the locomotive is one of those UP grain trains, right?
Yeah, so there's number 3 track. That's the grain cars that the UP put in there. This is the main line here. Those are the loads that came off the barges on there. And so this engine locomotive just probably put those there. Now he's going to go up here and go down number 1 track and pick up those Seattle North Coast cars, pull them out here, and they're going to go on the barge. And then the Seattle Yard will come in and pick those cars up from the other end. The Milwaukee will pick up those cars from the other end and take them into the Seattle Yard behind on the other side of the highway here. This picture doesn't show the railroad crossing. The railroad crossing is here, and it kind of goes over here like this. So this is southbound. So these southbound cars, if they saw that the train was on this part, they would try to beat the train across here. I'm here to tell you, it was.
And staring.
There you can see, there's a switch going.
There's a switch, that you could see going over there.
So there you can see the difficulty of visibility of the train crew. The head brakeman, he has to go out in the street here with fusees to flag the traffic, and this car is really blocking the view. You can see the vehicles sitting over there.
So now we're up at Port Townsend. Is this still in the North Coast area, Frank, or is this?
That's Olympic. That's your operation, Frank.
That's not the Seattle North Coast.
Now, how do you know that? That's what confuses me.
Oh,
Well, that's not a false dog.
Okay, this was after the Seattle North Coast. So Frank Zellerhoff at Port Townsend wanted to have rail service. So another gentleman that was at one time with the Milwaukee came to me and asked me if I could get some cars up there. And I was doing
Were you Napton or Peter Bricks by this point?
I was working for Peter Bricks at that time, Bricks Maritime. And so I got the rail car. This was the barge Seattle, I think. I put together a deal with the Bricks to rent me a rail car. And the Bill Clark was tugboat for Peter Bricks. She was just a little tugboat to move things around in Elliott Bay. So this barge could hold this is a 4-track barge it's 16 cars. It had a switch on it, so the track would be on the port side. It's the starboard side. On the port side had a switch on it, so it only held 3 cars. And so I got these our box cars and took them up to Port Townsend on this barge, and we had the switcher yet at Port Townsend. Oh, we took the switcher up with us. Yeah, we took that switcher up from Seattle with us on the barge, and we went to Port Townsend. We unloaded the barge and put the cars into Port Townsend, the mill, and they loaded the cars. And then Port Townsend Mill wanted to do it again, so I made arrangements with Bricks Maritime to get me this barge again. But there was an individual in Bricks that wasn't too keen about what I was doing, so he switched barges on me, and they gave me the Glacier Bay. The Glacier Bay,
which would be Alaska barge.
Yeah, the Alaska barge, and we put the cars on it, got it up there, and it wouldn't fit in the slip. and we had the locomotive on there, and the tracks were like lined up like a letter Z, and I couldn't risk taking them off of there. I couldn't risk, if I had put that locomotive in the drink up there, it would have been a big
Still be there.
disaster. So I sent them back to Seattle. And then the cars that were up there, these cars that we had put up there with the first barge, they had to unload all that freight and put it into trucks and truck it. It was quite a disastrous thing. And it was all because of one of the individuals was been out at Peter Ricks Maritime. At that time, it was so-called Napton. Was not happy with me getting involved like that, because at that time I was handling all the Alaska barge traffic, but over at Pier 15 and a half on the Harbor Island. Pier 27 was no longer in operation.
Now, this is complicated. Now, Frank, just give us some idea what's involved in loading and unloading a barge here.
Well, this guy here is really risking losing his life here, because this is the apron here, and they're going to put this barge underneath here, and he should no way in hell be down here like this. You get squashed in there. I almost got squashed in there once.
What happened on that?
I don't know exactly what they're lifting up there. This was a Foss barge. You can see this is a steel barge, and the rails are embedded in the deck of the barge, where the Milwaukee barges, Pier 20 and 21, they were up on timbers. The rails were up on like 12 by 16 timbers. So I just can't
quite figure out what they're doing.
I just have a hard time. I think this was the first trip. But this right here is a good picture. There shows you how we could adjust the tracks. There's a turnbuckle over on that side there. And this first length of track here floats on those steel plates there, so that we could line up the tracks with the tracks on the barge there. It was all pretty tricky, but it worked great.
Here's a John Illman photo switching now. This is still post.
That's Port Townsend.
Okay, but it's after Seattle and North Coast?
Yeah. It's after I left Seattle.
After
North Coast.
you left. But the Seattle and North Coast only lasted a couple of weeks after you left, as I recall. So
that was the new apron facility that I put together. That was originally bought by Milwaukee, and it was sat in a warehouse at Manson's Construction, and we needed. Bob Shanklin said we got to get this new apron, so I got to put together a deal with the Department of Transportation to help finance putting that slip in, and it was I just don't know how all this happened. It's hard for me to recall or to believe that we actually could put this together. But
and you got general construction involved then to replace the slip, right? Or the apron, I should say.
And Bob Shanklin was a key person on that, and that's why I was after getting Bob Shanklin involved in the Seattle North Coast Railroad. He was a knowledgeable, hard worker, reliable individual.
Yeah, everybody, it's sad that he's no longer with us, but everybody that I've ever met talking about Bob Shanklin talks about what a prince of a guy he was. What was his main role with the railroad? If you would, let's talk a little bit about Bob for a second.
Well, Bob and I met as I was a chief substation operator at Cedar Falls, and Bob and his crew were doing remodeling of the Beanery, the railroad hotel at Cedar Falls. And one thing led to another. Then after electrification closed down, I was hired by the Department of Transportation, both in the state of Washington and in Oregon, to examine the feasibility of running short line railroads because of deregulation taking place. And so I made a lot of friends and a lot of enemies. But Bob Shanklin went with me, and many times we climbed all these bridges. We went through culverts and tried to evaluate what it would cost to put a railroad together. So that's how Bob and I met, and I convinced when Milwaukee shut down and he was going to be out of a job, I convinced him and most of the rest of the people to come to work for Seattle North.
There you go. So I've got a sequence of photos taken by Tim Repp, and this shows what's involved in loading the barge at Port Townsend. So we've got a couple of, we've got the caboose here, Frank, and a couple of idler cars. And what are we doing?
Well, we're unloading and loading barge 20. That's the first barge. That's the Carol Foss right there. And so we'll unload and load this barge, and then they'll slide this barge back here and swing this one in here. See, that's the barge back there now sitting with loads, and it's going to swing this barge in here in between them and unload there. See them swinging in there. And when the weather was bad, if you got 5-foot seas here, you were SOL, so we'd have to go over to Mirrorstone Island, which is a naval ammunition facility, and we'd store the barges over there, and if we got a break, we'd come back. Well, if that happened, then the train crew would have to go back light.
Back to Port Angeles.
Back to Port Angeles.
Right.
And
so here they are kind of getting to the end of the switching operation, right? And we're getting ready to go?
Yeah. That's your road engine right there, and it could be that they're pulling his drag off and couple that, and then he'll come up here. This guy will go in the hole here. They'll pass each other up here, and then they'll hook up onto the.
Here's a Mike Bergman picture. Mike Bergman from the Tacoma chapter NRHS. This is the only picture I've seen of this location up on the bluff, watching them switch. So kind of a neat picture. Yeah, before the F units are repainted, we've got a number of pictures of them in their original BN colors. Another Mike Bergman picture. Mike said he just happened to be in the neighborhood and he saw a train, so he went down there and first got a picture of it up on the bluff, and then he goes down and he takes a picture down below. He said, really wasn't much of a railroad photographer. I just like trains and happened to see this train, so I thought I'd better take a picture of it. Yeah, Blair Koistra again. Now this is the mill in the background. When Frank and I were out there, we did our Sequiminar on March 9th. We were up there on March 8th, and Frank and I went by and looked at this. You would be hard-pressed to know that there was ever a railroad there. There's nothing left of the barge slip. The piers are all gone. This is just a hiking trail now. And another Blair Koistra photograph of before they were repainted in switching again. Go ahead, Frank.
Way over here, you can see what looks like broken concrete. Well, that's that concrete that I got from the Seattle waterfront.
With Dana's front end loader that he traded for some railroad ties.
Well, the story began that I bought a loader over in Seattle at an auction. And they had a trucking outfit take it down to Pier 27 so Frank could haul it up Sequim for me. Well, he liked it so well, he says, hey, can I borrow this for a little bit of stuff? And well, yeah, go ahead. So eventually, when he brought it, I had my other loader that I sent back. So he got to use some loaders, and I got some used railroad ties.
Start of a great partnership, as far as I could tell.
You can see the poor trackage right in here. It's all from settling down here, and purely lack of maintenance. The railroad ties were all really bad. This is only 65-pound steel. And so it was very, very risky for this tonnage here. These locomotives here, these F7s were like 2 wheels on each set of trucks, the drivers. Those Milwaukees that you saw had three drivers or 6 wheels on each one of these sets of trucks, which allowed it to negotiate the fluctuations in the track better. But anyway, the F7s really did work well.
Yeah, you never put one on the ground, did you?
Nope.
Came awful close, though, that one time. I remember Dale Stanley saying the boxcar went down the hill and he was wondering if the locomotive was going to go with it. The locomotive didn't. Almost went down the hill with it. So.
No, but I mean, everybody was negative, when you got these things, but you got by.
Well, we had that's just a good example of good engineer, good train crew that weren't really gun ho. They wanted to get the job done, but they were cautious. I made them those engineers. I made them write down where all the bad spots were, and the next day, maybe weren't running the train. He might be out there working with the track crew, saying, "Hey, this is where we're, coming apart. We can't go over 10 miles per hour, so jack it up and fix it."
So here we are at the highway overpass on Highway 20, and Dale Stanley was at our Sequiminar. He's not here today, but Dale told the story about how someone pulled a stop sign out of the ground that still had the cement, because you put it in cement, and they dropped it off the overpass and hit the locomotive in the windshield, right? And there was a rail fan that was a cop in Port Townsend, and the police officer was listening to the railroad on the scanner and heard this, and didn't they go up and arrest it? They caught him, didn't they? Yeah, they caught him, and this was the overpass where they dropped that off of. So
the interesting thing here, you see this photograph here, how the greenery is right down to the train, and then you see how it's scalped off there. Well, that's I went to Chicago and bought a Pettibone speed swing, and what that is, it's like an excavator. It can go on the track as well as on the road. It can crab sideways and everything. And they had a very large brush cutter on it. And it used to be that they used to burn all of the stuff along there. Well, we didn't go along with burning, so we brush cut this railroad. And the Weyerhaeuser was so impressed that I put together with a deal with them, and I sent that operator and that machine down to what's called the Moonscape down in Oregon to do all their railroad down there. He was down there for like 2 or 3 months, almost paid for that machine with that job.
Frank, the entrepreneur, some of the stories are just great. One of my favorite places on the railroad, this Blair Koester picture, Tukey's. And I've seen it with an apostrophe, without an apostrophe. I've seen it as Tukey, and I've seen it as Tukey's. So here the teepee burner is still going, and once in a while you'd load a car out of here.
Tukey's, there was a shingle mill.
Yeah, shingle mill.
And
in fact, here's a picture of it with a car on the siding.
This is the last trip of this locomotive. This is where we're taking the Milwaukee locomotive, giving it back to the Milwaukee.
Back to the bankruptcy trustee, yeah. So got a few more pictures here at Tukey's. We're running on a little slow here. I need to pick up the pace a little bit on our schedule, but we're...
Just to give you an idea, this rail car filled with this lumber is only like 40 ton. This rail car filled with newsprint is more like 80 ton. And you're running on this kind of track.
Oh, I know.
Well, they relayed the track on Blend Hill with the heavier iron belts that they go right up there.
Yeah.
Here we are at Discovery Junction. Again, one of the early runs. This is a Blair Koester picture. and you can kind of see in the map where the junction is. Wasn't there a place where the crews like to eat around here, Frank? Tell me about that.
Well, there used to be a German restaurant over here, and the train crews. This, by the way, this train is coming from Port Townsend, is heading back to Port Angeles. You can see the empty car there. So anyway, on the eastbound run, I don't know about west. I don't think westbound, but on the eastbound, the train has come out of Port Angeles, so they've been on the road for 4 hours, say 4 or 5 hours when they get here, and they're getting hungry. So they would call this restaurant and let them know they were going to stop, come in and get something to eat. And then, so I couldn't figure out why the heck they couldn't get to Port Townsend in a proper amount of time. And so I went to the restaurant and I said, you know, if these gentlemen if my train crew is going to come in and eat, you got to be able to get them out of here in 30 minutes. Because they were in there like an hour and a half.
Right, and now all of a sudden you go dead on hours, and you got a dog catching the crew. So,
Yeah, but to be honest with you, I did that in Seattle too, because the train crews would go over to 4th Avenue or someplace. And in fact, I went over there once, and a couple of them were asleep there, and I said, hey, I would blackball some of the restaurants.
yeah, we would cross them
So
off.
later on, there was a place up a ways. That's where we stopped to get beans. It was in and out.
Yeah, and then the story back in the Milwaukee days, the Milwaukee had a certain whistle cadence that they would use. And when the Milwaukee would go by, they would toot the horn or toot the whistle in a certain way, and that would notify the restaurant that on the way back that they were going to be stopping to get something to eat. So there's some fun stories down here about the restauranting in the neighborhood. Again, in one of the early pictures, a Michael Sawyer picture from 1982 at Discovery Junction. This is a train heading towards Port Townsend. And another picture here by Dale Sanders. Dale is very kind. This is the trip where they're returning the Milwaukee Road locomotive back to the bankruptcy trustee. So, and then we've got Maynard, which is just kind of like around the corner, isn't it? You guys, right? Yeah. And John Illman photo here. Special thanks to the Center for Railroad Photography and Art, Madison, Wisconsin, for making these Illman photos available for us for these series of presentations. They were very gracious and very kind and very helpful. And when we first talked to them about it, they said, oh, we don't have any of those pictures. So we actually have found the index from Dick Dorn, who had the pictures originally and gave them to CRPA. Daniel Cozine got the index from Dorn. We gave it to CRPA. They went back out into the warehouse and said, oh, gee, I guess we've got all these pictures after all. It was quite the Easter egg hunt to get these into our presentation. The Blair Cuesta shot at Maynard on the trestle there. And Michael Sawyer was with him that day. Blair was shooting black and white. Michael was shooting color. So we got the drover's caboose with a couple of those boxcars. And then they would occasionally load cars out of here.
Yeah, years ago they did. It was they made veneer there, peel, for plywood, the veneer inside the plywood, that little mill.
And then they'd haul the cars back to Port Angeles and then use them at Penply?
Well, I was told by one of the conductors, they picked up a car, took it on the barge, and about a week later, it was consigned to Penply. It went to Seattle, then it came back. So
That white car that you see there, that's anhydrous ammonia. And that was a pretty hazardous thing. We had
And that's going to one of the mills then, as a load.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's empty coming back.
Oh, that's empty coming back. That's right. So the boxcars are loads and the tank cars are empty this way. And of course, yours truly has to sneak in here, and you know, I was out there once and we actually got a couple of pictures. And so, you know what, this was the best picture I had at Gardner, so it got to be included, but it had to be good if I was going to use it. Otherwise,
Well,
you know.
and then, Frank put together a deal to log the right of way and open it up. I mean, if before that you'd have never got that picture, Jonathan, because it'd been
It reduced the fire hazard by 99%.
Okay, and you got a little money for the logs, too.
Yeah, help pay wages.
Yep, pay wages. You know, some of the stories that come out, and you hear them in different presentations about all the things that Frank and Dana and these guys did to keep the railroad going. It really was it was heartwarming.
we were all working hard to save it.
Yeah. There's just too many things working against us. So this is Blinn Hill. No? Where is this? Gardner still. Okay. And the train is heading which way?
Look out.
Okay, that's heading east. Okay, what's the point in the background?
That is Diamond Point, and years ago, it was a quarantine station. So ships coming in had to stop there at the quarantine station, check, see if there was any disease, if there was anything. They had a marine hospital there. It was it closed them down in the early 30s, late 20s. But yeah.
Here's a Dale Sanders shot at Blinn, and we'll get into the bling of Blinn here in a little bit. But and then another picture by yours truly on my one visit out there, May of '84. And then here we are, County Line Road, right, Steve? That's what I put in the notes. The Diamond Point Road, and I checked with the county engineer of Clallam County to make sure I had the location right. Oh, wait a minute, that was Steve Hauff. Yes. So December 30th, 1982, Tim Rep photograph. And this is a similar
Blinn.
spot. This Blinn with the log
Yard.
There's log yard here too. And another picture of the log yard. Seabridge Creek, did I get this one right? Knock on wood. Check with my scientists on this one. Yep, okay. And again, a couple of pictures by Dale, the spring colors. And here we are in Sequim. Now, what I liked about the picture on the left was that this was a Boy Scout project to redo the station signs. Do you remember that, Frank? The Boy Scouts redoing the station signs for you?
Yeah, that's this siding, you see the track right here. That's the borough right there. But this is the track that we used to go down to the propane facility.
What?
Where we took the propane.
Yeah, propane and butcher's pull yard.
And the newspaper. And,
The newspaper was the next siding up.
The next siding up.
And then the passenger trains would run around their trains here. Right. Okay. We'll get into the passenger trains. Not all the stuff about the passenger trains, but some of the stuff. And so, again, here's a sequence. Now, that's the Sequim Depot, but it's not a depot in this picture. What is it, Dana?
It was a restaurant.
What restaurant was it?
I forget what they called it. It started out with a bang, but it didn't last all that long.
Yeah, they had a bank deal there. So.
The crew stopped eating there for beans because it got so bad. So.
Oh dear. And of course, this picture is long gone as Highway 101 runs right through the middle of the scene today. So here we are in beautiful downtown Sequim.
That's the grain elevator. At one time, I remember one night I was on the train and we dropped a car of feed into that mill.
Right.
And when you get down to where the stoplight is and you hang a left, doesn't that go to your house, Dana?
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, Dana just lives down at the end of the street. And so the shopping center is kind of a vintage shot. July of '82, and this is a passenger train that has turned. They've run around the train at Sequim and now are heading back to Port Angeles. And they had some interesting passenger trains, a Michael Sawyer freight shot. And then our previous presentation back in March was at the Dungeness River Nature Center. And the people of the Dungeness River Nature Center said, this picture is a Photoshop, isn't it? And I asked Tim Rep, and he said, well, we fixed the balance, we adjusted the color a little bit. And they said, no, you mean, they said, like the Kate Middleton picture, Photoshopped picture. And they're going, no, this is a real train on that bridge. And they couldn't believe it, because the Dungeness River Nature Center, the main line goes right down the center of where the building is now. So they were quite taken with this. And the river has moved. The river no longer goes underneath this bridge. And I think, didn't Bob Shanklin kind of move that river around a little bit?
Well, no, Milwaukee in the 1960s, we had high water, and it washed out this approach. And they double shifted the bridge gang up there. That's where Bob and my paths cross. I didn't know it at the time, but he ran the night crew rebuilding, and the original approach were just on mud sills, and they went and drove piling.
And I also remember hearing stories about how Frank and Bob would climb up on the top of this bridge and take core samples out of the timbers to make sure the bridge was still sound. So we'll see this bridge again in a little bit. Another passenger train, looks like must be May at Carlsberg. And not Carlsborg, Carlsberg, I'm told. Yeah, it is. Mountains in the background. And here we are at beautiful downtown Agnew, named for a landowner, not named for the mayor of or the governor of Maryland. So need to correct, some people ask me, well, how did he ever end up out here? And it's like, no, it's a different guy. So Dale Sanders was going through some stuff, and he says, did you know there was some Seattle and North Coast stuff in the stuff you gave me? And I said, no. And he goes, yeah, there was. And so I got the stuff he was scanning back, and this picture was in there, and it was taken by Ken Seacrest, who's a noted Milwaukee Road historian. And when I asked him permission to use the photograph, he said, we were lucky that day. The sun popped out just in time for the run-by, because it had been cloudy all day, and he got the picture in sun. So very nice shot. And Morse Creek, we're getting closer to Port Angeles now. And yours truly actually got a couple pictures here at Morse Creek, too. And I want to point out in the second picture with the caboose just how well the signage is laid out on that road so that it's very safe. And we owe that debt of gratitude to the county engineer of Coelum County for that. Very nice, Steve. Very safe. People still ran into it, but that's a different issue. So we can kind of see the overview of the city of Port Angeles. And in Steve's presentation, he was talking about where the Y was, where the mills are, and stuff like that. Just an iconic picture from, actually, I think we got it from the Department of Ecology, and it ended up in the Cascade Rail Foundation collection. So now we're getting to Port Angeles. I'll get this straight. And a Blair Coister picture in the yard. And another picture with the drover's caboose and the passenger train in, I think, isn't it Bayside Yard is the name of it? Yeah, okay. All right. And going by the depot, and this is the third depot in Port Angeles. And it was built and then moved to this location, we think? Yes, indeed. And folks, this is a good one because this building lives on today in a proper use. It is a hobby shop. So it has survived. In Alan Miller's presentation, we have a picture of the hobby shop. Yeah, right here in Bayside Yard, Ken Ardinger, very kind to let us include this stuff in our presentation. And I love this picture because of the sign about your dogs. The owner shall be responsible for the actions of their animals. The port did that, not the county engineer, right? Yeah. Okay, yeah, we don't know the county engineer or anything. We do owe the county engineer credit for these pictures in Port Angeles on an absolutely lovely day. And it looks like the crew is picking up orders in the second picture. Would that be a fair assumption, Steve? Yeah, okay. And going along the waterfront in front of the Red Lion, the train crew always told that I've talked to people that were on the train crew, Dale Stanley and some of the other people. I guess I'm going to repeat it. They always liked to go slow when they went by the Red Lion. So I'll just I'll let you think about that. Yeah, I won't go any further. And then the train heading back the other way past the Red Lion. And a couple guys on the crew. Do we ever figure out who these two guys are, Dana? Can you kind of tell, or are they too far away?
I think one of them, Randy, isn't it?
Randy, I think Randy Stark.
Almost.
Yeah.
Isn't that Dale?
Could be Dale Stanley. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Randy and Dale, because both those guys would work in the yard in Port Angeles,
I think
wouldn't
that's Rogers, engineer.
Oh, okay.
Don Rogers.
Okay. So who are the people in the picture here?
That's Bob Shanklin.
In his truck. That was his truck, wasn't it, Frank?
That was actually my truck.
Oh, sorry. Glad I got that straightened out.
And when this picture was taken, Bob might have been, it might have been after I left.
Okay. And we don't know who the other guy is.
I drove that in Idaho, and when I bought the 15 miles of railroad over there, and drove it over here.
Couple of pictures of the crew. Ray Barbieri, who was an engineer.
George Porter, Chuck Bible.
What did Chuck Bible do for the railroad?
He ran the burro, a crane operator, equipment operator.
And he had kind of a permanent assignment to work that Morse Creek Hill?
He might have. I heard rumors that he had run the locomotive, but
I rode with him a couple times.
I don't know. I don't remember giving him the approval to do that, but
well, I don't know.
It's water into the dam now, folks. I think the statute of limitations is gone on that one. Another picture of Ray Barbieri at Port Townsend, and then the infamous dynamic duo, Larry Bunting and Art Allen, on one of their passenger trains. And we would be remiss if we didn't include a photo of those two guys. So we'll just leave it at that. This picture is the only one that changed from the other presentation, because now we know who all the people are in the picture, because we didn't know the second person from the left was Randy Starks until we actually got out to Sequim, and Randy, one of you guys, or Randy maybe said that was him. This is what is noted in the file as the final run of the Seattle and North Coast. And what did they do, Dana? They made an arrangement with the trustee to move the passenger cars back to Seattle with the locomotive, I think, right? And this was the final, what we believe to be the final run. And they had the 55, which was the 869 at one time. And here it is at Morse Creek. And again, you notice that very safe signage there. And at Siebert's Creek, crossing the bridge there with the passenger train. And the last shot, crossing the Dungeness River. That's a great shot by John Illman, famous photographer. And then this is sort of the epilogue, the equipment sitting stored in the snow at Pier 27 in Seattle. So a couple of credit photos left, and we've got 10 pictures left to go, and we'll be done. So I want to make sure that I give credit to all the photographers. Steve Hauff was in the audience today, Blair Koistra, Dale Sanders, Ken Seacrest. All of these folks really went out of their way to contribute for this project, and I'm very grateful for them. Tim Rep gets a special credit. Here's a picture of Tim driving a train and a picture that Tim took of a photo of the crossing eastbound over the Dungeness River. Again, a special thanks to Adrian Evans and Gilbert Taylor of the Center for Railroad Photography and Art, Madison, Wisconsin, for all of the help that they were able to provide for getting us the John Illman collection. And people I talked to said, oh yeah, this is John Illman. John Illman was always a very sharp dresser, very professional guy. And you'll notice 5/20/13, so we're just commemorating his passing just a little over 11 years ago. A special thanks to Aaron Schwartz, who's in the audience. Aaron was a big help on this, along with Paul and Mark, the folks from PNRA that helped, and the individual researchers who I've listed here, who were quite helpful in making this presentation possible. This was a 6 months effort to get this presentation together. Ken Seacrest moderates several Facebook pages, and if you're interested, you can find out more about Olympic Peninsula Railroads and the Seattle and North Coast, and that would be Ken Seacrest. He was very helpful. And Cascade Rail Foundation maintains its collection at the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive here in Burien, Washington, 2 blocks from here. PNRA provided the Zoom stream for the presentation that we did in March, not for today. Recording and streaming and video work by Joshua Wiersma, who's in the back from Autochrome Media, my partner in all of this. He's just a great guy to work with, and it's just a pleasure. I'm your executive producer, host, moderator, and we'll help put the chairs away when we're done. And I want to say thank you to everybody for being here today. This concludes our presentation.